All right, so first thing I want to know is, can I get a wall-sized photo of my family for 15 bucks? So that's what that ad,
20, yeah.
wasn't it? Like,
The 16 by 20, 15 bucks.
really?
That's awesome.
That's awesome right there.
That's hey, Chuck, that's snapperific.
Right there. That is snapperific. All right, so my name is Chuck Miller. I'm from Compuware Dynatrace, and I'm going to speak to you guys a little bit about application performance. And we've been in the. I come from the Dynatrace side of the house, and I don't know if you guys have. Who's heard of Dynatrace? 1, 2, 3. All right. No, you guys don't count. All right. So I come originally from Dynatrace. I was with Dynatrace for about 4 years before we were acquired by Compuware. And essentially, we were one of the fastest growing application performance management products in the marketplace. And there are really good reasons for that. And I won't go into all of those details because I know I'm under time constraint. But essentially, this past July, Compuware bought Dynatrace. And we've continued to do extremely well in the marketplace, and I'm going to get into some of the details of that, but not all of them. Obviously, there's a big focus on, for Dynatrace, a big focus on user experience, and a big area of user experience is mobile, right? So for us, it's all the regular browsers that, regular website kind of stuff and we are able to characterize that performance actually from the browser itself, and then follow that stuff back into the back end. So we have this tagging and tracing technology, and we extended that into the mobile browsers, right? So all the JavaScript-enabled mobile browsers, and then we just recently extended that into native mobile apps. And so the idea there is, I know there's probably a lot of people that are building, specific apps, you put them on the App Store, people download them and just use them. But there's also a big enterprise orientation around these applications, and there's a lot of server-side conversations going on, SOAP over HTTP and so on and so forth, and that's really what we're talking about. If it's a specific iPhone app or Android app, and it's just running on the phone, then and it's a standalone app, then we're not really in the mix at all, right? But if it is an enterprise-oriented application that's communicating to back-end resources, and you want to understand the user's experience, and you want to understand every component of that user experience all the way back into the back end, back to the database, that's what we're talking about. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit more detail. So that's sort of the marketing slide about Dynatrace. Forget about that, you don't care. You don't care. We have lots of customers, but again, that's more marketing orientation. Okay, so if you look at what Dynatrace does relative to the APM market space, this is what nets out how we're different. Okay, the space has been around a long time. We compete with the typical big players: IBM, HP, CA. These guys all have products in the space. They all have some mobile flavor as well. But this is what really sets us apart. One, there's no configuration. You get our agents in the mix. You don't have to do anything else except for mobile native, which I'll get into. And then number two, we capture every transaction from every user all the time. So if you had us inside a mobile native app and you instrumented the event handlers, right, with the Dynatrace ADK, then we're going to see every transaction from that device 7 by 24, right? And we're going to see that all the way through to the back end. So if it talks to the web server, which then talks to some .NET or Java-based app server and some database in the back, we're going to see every single transaction as that happens. And obviously, user perspective is key, right? So from a monitoring standpoint, and also even before that. So we also, I'm going to skip down to number 5, we're a lifecycle product. So we're there in the development cycle. We're there in the staging environment when you're doing load testing, right? And the idea is to catch problems before they get into production. And then, of course, we're in production just in case, users do things that are unexpected. We're going to catch that stuff as well. And being across the life cycle is key. The earlier you can catch problems, the cheaper it is, right, before it gets into production and damages the brand and maybe costs you revenue and so on. That's the idea. And then, of course, we're also business aware, so we can monitor transactions in business terms. We can group transactions together into business functions, monitor those, threshold those, can be notified if there are problems, and we're capturing the deep detail when problems do happen that you guys need, right? Development needs what happened inside the application, right? Development needs to know, was it, I know you guys are developing tight code, right? So it's probably something on the back end. Well, with Dynatrace you can prove that, right? It was those back end guys that were the problem. It was the database guys that were the problem. It was the network that was the problem, right? So that's kind of what we're about. And this is what it looks like. So you can get our agent into the web server, into the back-end infrastructure. And what happens is when, let's say it's mobile browser orientation, we inject JavaScript into the browser at runtime from the web server, and then we characterize the performance from the browser back into the back-end. So every click that happens, we're capturing that, right? From a mobile perspective, because there's no real way to get ourselves inside those applications, inside the application instances, you do have to actually dress the code. And I have a couple of examples just so you can see what that looks like. So you import, in Droid land, you import our jar. In iOS land, it's Objective-C library, and then you make API calls to our library. But we make it easy, and we also do the tagging and tracing for you. Right? So you can follow that into the back end. So all these agents pump data to the Dynatrace environment, okay? And here we stitch those transactions together. So you can see a multi-tier view emanating from a native iPhone app or a native Droid app or mobile browser and follow that into the back end. And again, every user, all the time, 24/7, every transaction. Any questions so far? Is this interesting or is it boring? I'm going to ask the. Yeah? All right. Okay, so just a little bit more on what this looks like. I know that this is very difficult to see, but essentially what we have is code inside this. This is actually an Android-based application, so inside Eclipse doing actually Java development there, and we're actually calling events from within the application that are going to then flow through that chain into the web server, into the Dynatrace server as part of that overall transaction flow. And we'll see this in a minute. This is what it looks like inside the Dynatrace product, right? And here are some examples of being inside an event handler and making our API calls. Right, so it's very straightforward. You can nest, right? So I can start an event and start another event, and those will end up being nested inside the call tree within Dynatrace. And you'll see what the call tree looks like in a minute. And then of course you have to unnest, right? And then this is an example. I know you guys can't read that at all probably, but this is an example of actually doing the tagging, right? So exactly how you make your connection into the back end. Right, so maybe you're doing an HTTP connection or HTTPS connection. You pass that connection object to our API, and we'll automatically tag that conversation into the back end, provided our agents are on the other side, which in this case they would be. Make sense? Say yes. Somebody say yes.
Yeah.
Can I get a yes? All right. All right, so enough of that. Let's have a look at what this looks like. Okay. So this is an example of the Dynatrace user interface. And what we've done here is we've layered all transactions across the globe. Right? We have a pre-built GeoIP database, and that's configurable, by the way. So if it's a an internal application that is on a private network, you can make this diagram happen as well. And each one of these little circles are represent visits, and we're also scoring these visits. And a visit basically is user hits your site. We basically see what their landing page was, and I'm talking web here. We see the landing page that they hit, and then we watch everything they did, all the click stream that they did. And if they stop doing something for a certain period of time, which is configurable, that's 30 minutes is the default, then we'll book that as a visit. And this is where you can start to look and see what kind of click stream people are doing, right? And from a native mobile app perspective, I mean, you're basically in charge of which event handlers you're inside, which events that you're emanating, but you'll be able to see those click streams right within the visit. So we would be capturing exactly what you're talking about, right? They did this, then they backed up, and then they, you know what I mean? If those events were all instrumented. And you can drill into these visits and these are also scored. We're scoring this by AppDex, which is a performance consortium. So you can see whether the user's happy, tolerating, or frustrated. And then from here you can drill in Dynatrace. Everything's always hot, so you can always right click and drill down. And now I can see the visits, right, broken out by satisfied or tolerating. Actually, let me go back, sorry. I want to go from the world view and just drill into those visits, because that's where, and I just switched over to by browser or by device, right? And here you can see we've got all the major flavors of and browsers and browser types and browser versions, including mobile and mobile browsers, and also mobile devices, right? So this is what this would look like if you had actually instrumented the mobile application and were emanating those events into the Dynatrace environment. So now I can see all the visits by device type, and then within these visits, you see on the bottom there you have all the page actions, right? So everything that they did during that visit, and again, if they stop doing something for 30 minutes, that's when we book it, right? So we assume they're kind of done, right? And so you'll get the click stream of that visit. And then the other thing is, if I drill down into what we call the page action pure path, right? So that's that thread of execution, starts from the mobile native application and flows into the back end, right? You can see that the technical details of that particular page action, including a transaction flow diagram. Let me just pull this up and pull this over and maybe shrink that down just a little bit. All right, so now what I'm getting is for that particular page action, right, or that particular event from the native mobile device, I'm following it into the web server, and then I'm seeing, okay, well, what application instances work together to service that particular request. Okay, so this is one request from one user, and we're able to tag and trace and see all the conversations that happen. If you had, multi-tier conversations happening from the web server to some series of back-end application servers, and then there's some conversation to the database, right, and the SQL statements, we're able to see that entire chain and characterize it from a performance standpoint. So I don't know if you can see this, right, but 51% of that time was spent actually on the mobile app itself. So this is not what you want. Obviously, we're kind of simulating this because we're trying to talk about, mobile experience, right? And then 0.4%, or 0.04, 0.86, 23% on some C++ backend, So basically, that's the idea, is to capture the performance from every user, from every device, and follow it into the back end. And then you can threshold this, and I'm talking again, production orientation now. You can threshold this, you can be alerted against the performance of these things, and obviously you can do analysis, clickstream analysis, right, and deep analysis of what these transactions are doing. So just to highlight that in a little bit more detail, if I wanted to, from here I could say, okay, well, show me the database calls that got invoked as a result of that event from that native mobile application, right? And the performance of those database calls, right? So the idea is to have that whole chain and to know exactly what happened. And that's why we call it the pure path, because it is a pure representation of exactly what happened when that user clicked that particular button or whatever event you instrumented. So I was told to keep this at 15 minutes, and I think I've done that. Yeah. So, but I think I have a few minutes for questions if anybody has any.
We use a similar product called New Relic. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but how does your pricing structure compare to that?
Pricing? I'm the engineering guy. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, they're SaaS oriented, right?
Correct.
They're in the cloud,
Right.
and we're on site.
Okay. So we need to set up servers and all that kind of stuff?
Right. But how it is different from a pricing standpoint, I just don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, it's not for, you don't have to set up servers. It's per app server.
Right.
So-
No, but you have
so
to set up a
.NET
Dynatrace server though.
Right. Right.
Yeah, you host it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At some point you were saying how